Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Azure On Air with a new host. So I'm Amrita here, product consultant of Serverless 360. Today in our show we have got a very interesting speaker. He's an Azure developer, an Azure architect, and he's also a very active person in the Azure community. Considering his contribution to the Azure community, the Microsoft has also provided him as the MVP award. And today we have none other than Jan De Vries, my very first speaker. I'm happy to have him in our show. Welcome, Jan.
What I see often happening in the world is security is an afterthought. The easiest part is by just securing your data repositories. It depends per organization and per project, of course. Yeah, I think all domains you're working in should have at least the isolation of the data repository. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. So today, when I approached you, your topic blindly was I would like to go ahead and talk about multi-level security. That was your first go, and we fixed it. So why did you immediately jump into the particular topic called multi-level security? Why? And we also like to know what is multi-level security.
Yeah, great question. So, what I see often happening in the world is security is an afterthought when developing and designing and deploying solutions within Azure or any other cloud, or maybe even on-prem.
Hmm.
And I think some more uh, interest has to be taken into it from all perspectives, from infrastructure and developer perspective.
Hmm.
So that's why I'm focusing on it for the past, couple of months, and doing a lot of data security, solidifying your Azure environment and your solutions.
Hmm. All right. So, to know more about multi-layer security. So, when we have good number of security perspectives in Azure, why would an organization choose for multi-layer security? What is the need for multi-layer security? And could you just explain what are the different layers that you mentioned in this multi-layer security?
Yeah, every organization should apply it in one form or another. The easiest part is by just securing your data repositories from the public internet, because everything you deploy to the cloud is public because it's a public cloud.
Hmm.
And you probably don't want your SQL server or your file storage being out in the open to the internet. Uh, Obviously, Azure has some security measures in place, like logging in with the Active Directory or having a SAS tokens or any other form. But you should take it a step further, and it doesn't even cost you much, and you can bring it to the next levels by adding firewalls, gateways, strict authorization and authentication policies and stuff like this. But just start with the easiest stuff, or the most cost effective stuff, by taking away the data repositories from the public internet.
Hmm. Yeah.
And everyone should be applying this, because once you've done it, it's quite easy. But even if you haven't done it, it's a great way to start and think about networking and securing your infrastructure.
Yeah, that's completely an reasonable quote from you. Yeah, to definitely make sure that your system is having a multi-layer security. So
Yeah.
yeah, so drill deeper. What are the different layers that you consider here? What are the different layers that you specify as a multi-layer security here?
What I'm splitting it down to most often is in three or maybe even four layers, depending
Hmm.
on how you count. The first one, which I just spoke of, is securing your data repositories, is by adding virtual networks to your environment, and setting some policies on it, like only internal traffic, internal services can access this. So having your SQL server in a virtual network, your storage account in a virtual network, Cosmos DB, stuff like this, so no one can access this aside from your own services.
Hmm.
So that's the first part. And then you can take it up another level if you feel like it, and you should, or at least I think you should.
Yeah.
Is by adding authentication and authorization to your services, to your software, or by adding some more Azure services to your environment, like API management, application gateway, or front door, or Azure firewall, stuff like this.
Mm.
And once you're done with this, you can build on top of this and add some more policies for API management with the subscriptions. So you can define an API management which service can connect to another by having subscriptions on products, on services, stuff like this, and add some request throttling. And you can even do some modeling of requests and responses. So that's three or four, depending how you count, uh, uh, levels you can add,
Mm.
and it will take a lot of work to get to the most advanced level, but it's definitely worth it if you work in
Yeah.
an environment which needs a lot of security. So if you're working for a small customer, it obviously also needs a lot of secure environment, but they probably don't have the time or resources to pay for this. If you're working in an enterprise environment, they probably do have the time and resources to implement stuff like this. So it all depends on the customer and the project, of course.
Yes, of course. So each customer and each product is different, and definitely it's worth it when you imply it, the multi-layer security. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah. So moving further, I'm very curious to know about the user managed identities for access restriction. So of course that is a frequent ask when we even go for customers. Yeah, we do have customers in the Azure end, and when we go there, user managed identities for access restrictions is one of the frequent term that we come across. Yeah, would you like to highlight on that for our viewers?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So it's something I've worked on last year, I guess,
Cool.
and it was still, well, not new because you could do it before, but it
Hmm.
wasn't documented rather great, and the Azure Portal UI wasn't well available for this, so you needed to do a lot of REST calls.
Mm,
But you need to do, and you mentioned user managed identities, but you can also do this with system managed identities,
mm,
depending on your preference. So the first thing you need to do is add those managed identities to your services, like an app services or function app.
mm,
And you should already be doing this because you can grant these managed identities access to stuff like Service Bus, SQL, well, all other Azure resources. But you can also use this for communication between services. So if service A needs to communicate to service B, you can
mm.
also add the JOT token to the HTTP request and have the service B authorize or authenticate the incoming request. What you need to do for this, or what I'm using for this, is adding application registrations within Active Directory.
Mm,
Configure these settings. Like what you need is the client ID, the tenant ID, and well, that's about it.
mm,
In the service B in this example, and add app roles,
mm,
application roles, full
mm,
in
mm.
full. It's well, the app roles is short. It's in the manifest. If you have access to the Active Directory, you can click on an app registration and go to the manifest blade, and you see there's some block called app roles with an array of
Yes.
roles, app roles.
Yeah.
It's the name. And you can specify if you want to have a role called reader, writer,
Mm,
and go full on granular on this. And you can use those roles just the same as you're used to with normal user authentication in your service. So having the authorized attribute on your controller and
mm.
check for a specific role. So that way your endpoint is secured and all incoming requests need to have a valid role. Now the next part is the tricky part. So now we have configured the app roles for your service B, and now we need to assign service A some app roles to communicate with service B. And this was the tricky part because the Azure Portal UI didn't have any UI or blade for this, so we
Mm-mm.
needed to do a REST call, a post to what's it called, the Graph API of
Mm-mm.
Azure AD.
Mm-mm.
Nowadays, there's a nice blade for this, like a request API permissions, it's called, and you can just go to the managed identity or the enterprise application for your service A
Mm.
and request API permissions to service B. So you have a nice UI for this, and you can just select which permissions you want to have on this service A on this managed identity. So it appears the people at Microsoft or the people at Azure teams also want you to use this or to leverage these capabilities because there's work involved and being made available to make this experience easier for the people who don't want to script this. I've
Mm.
got some scripts in a GitHub repository for this, so you can check this out. We'll put it in the show notes, I guess. So you can
Sure.
check out how to do this in an Azure CLI and PowerShell script. But
Yeah,
you can
sure.
also do this in the Azure portal now just by going to the enterprise applications, check out where the managed identity is, and
Mm.
request API permissions for either your services or your other Azure services.
Mm. Yeah, so that was really a good insight from your end, Jan. So my next question would be, what are the factors that are to be considered in the multi-layer security? So when a particular organization or a domain is trying to implement multi-layer security, what are the main factors that they should have a checklist of, or they would like to consider about the important factors about multi-layer security?
Yeah, great question. Well, it depends per organization and per project, of course,
Mm,
and how secure do you need to be? So at the moment, I'm working at a customer in agriculture, and
mm,
all users are the advisors of farmers or the farmers themselves,
mm,
which needs which could need a different way of securing the environment compared to when you communicate with a banking organization. So I've got a different customer who needs to integrate with banks
mm,
uh, and the government. Uh, and the government and the banks need to have a document saying, we can handle penetration testing, we can handle hacks, we can handle zero-day exploits, stuff like this, and we
mm.
need to know our data is secure. And the agriculture sector I'm working in right now doesn't have uh, these mandatory things, mandatory rules, uh, and it costs money and time and effort. So, at a project with the government and the banking sector, we have these things in place, and we have added stuff like application gateway, API management, and an Azure firewall. Uh, just to make sure we're secure and we can handle this stuff.
Mm,
Because application gateway has a lot can do some in-depth request analysis and securing this for HTTP traffic. So when you're sending SQL injection in your post or in your GET requests, when you handle SQL injection requests, application gateway will be able to notice this and have a red flag and even block these kinds of requests.
yeah.
Also, you probably heard of the Log4j exploit last month,
Oh, yeah.
uh, which was you could send a request to a service, and whenever Log4j would log a specific line, uh,
Mm,
uh, a specific line in the logs, it would invoke this and retrieve data from a specific endpoint,
okay.
which was specified in the request. So that's a bad thing. Uh, but Azure Firewall had like within 1 or 2 days some measures for this, so you could check for the outbound traffic of your services, and
Mm,
it could block these types of requests. So that's the benefit of having multiple Azure services for this, like application gateway for incoming requests, but also
mm,
Azure Firewall for outbound requests, and you can all handle this and check uh, check what's happening.
yeah.
And because everything is tightly connected with the log analytics, you can also query for this and have alerts for this via Azure Monitor. So it's a mix and match thing. So adding all those Azure services to the mix will make your environment pretty robust and secure. And if you need this, this is great.
Mm,
You do have to pay for this, and you do have to invest time for this to implement it. But it's great.
yes.
The project I'm working on now, we're not on this level yet,
So that
because
was my next question. So you have come across so many things, you've explained so many things to us. So do you have plans? Because agriculture is some domain that is very interesting to deal with. Technology and agriculture together is something very interesting. So do you have plans to implement this in your solution? So currently you said it's not in line now, but if you are planning to implement it, what would be the necessity for you to implement this in your system? Where would you implement it?
yeah, so what we're planning on now, the project I'm working on now is on Kubernetes, so
Mm.
Azure Kubernetes Service, and our ingress is handled via Nginx in one of or in a couple of the pods. So that's good enough to start with a project. But
Mm.
nowadays, it's also possible to have the ingress being handled by application gateway. So we plan to have application gateway as the ingress controller for our Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
So all incoming HTTP traffic will be handled via application gateway, which will route it to, well, any of the services, any of the pods which it's necessary for. So we can kill off all the Nginx pods. And
Mm.
all of our pods already have a user managed identity, so we can start leveraging the authorization and authentication via those managed identities. So that's the first step, or the first two steps we're planning for.
Okay.
But also, we're running across some problems with all of the pods wanting to connect to the different data resources we have within Azure.
Mm.
So we also have on the list of going to a hub and spoke architecture. So
Mm.
having the hub, the hub talking to the different spokes. And what we're doing for this is totally locking down all of our data repositories. Like I mentioned earlier, having them in a VNet and a subnet, and only allowing traffic from specific
Yeah.
services.
Yeah.
But we're taking a step further and
Mm.
going to use private link for this, so
Oh.
they can live
Okay.
in a totally isolated virtual network,
Mm.
which no one has access to, and you can only
Mm.
connect to those services with a private link endpoint, which is,
Mm.
well, the next level compared to what I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So those
Yes.
are plans we have, and well, it takes time, but we see the need for this from both a security and a technical perspective from a developer point of view, because at the moment all developers can just access everything,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we lock this down, so we we don't have this permission anymore.
Okay, yeah. So that was nice to hear about your infrastructure and when you're going to implement it. Obviously, it was very interesting to know about it in specific. So, speaking about in domain specific, yeah. So, what particular domains would you think should definitely need multi-layer security? So, there would be some domains whom you recommend multi-layer security to. So, can you just list them and why should they use multi-layer security?
Yeah, I think all domains you're working in should have at least the isolation of the data repositories,
Mm,
like the SQL, like the storage accounts, and stuff like this. everyone should be doing this because it's costs about $0
Mm.
per month, and it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
Depending if you have IT pros in your project, they might have an opinion on how your IP ranges should be. But if you don't have them, just go with the next finish steps and be done with it. So that's that. Everyone should be doing this. And depending on what your customer or what you think your customer needs,
Mm.
like in the banking and government and stuff like this, insurance, you probably want to have things like application gateway or maybe even front door added to your environment.
Mm.
Front door has some benefits compared to application gateway because it's a global service. So if
Yeah.
you're operating on global projects, it might make sense to have front door added to your solution. The major downside of it is it doesn't have VNet integration support. And application gateway does have this, so that's the annoying part of front door. Front door
Mm.
does have a private link support, so if you're going for the hub and spoke model, you could use this. You could use front door for it, but I'd only use this if you want to go global. And having application gateway in the mix as your starting point makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
If you can spend these extra, well, I think it's $300 per month per
Okay.
compute unit. So depending on if you can afford it, definitely use this. If you're just a small, well, let's say a small baker
Mm.
around the corner and only want to have your aesthetic site
Mm.
on the internet, don't add this. It's costing a lot of money and it doesn't make sense. But if you're using, well, if you're storing data and if you're storing personal data, it's very beneficial to have this in the mix, especially if you want to handle exploits or see what the incoming requests are.
Yeah.
And having monitoring firewall the outbound traffic. If you have outbound traffic for your services, please add Azure Firewall, but it does cost a lot of money, in my opinion. Well, it's a lot of money. It's I think it's $700 per month.
Okay.
So that's I think that's a lot of money.
Yes,
It's
of
worth
course it is.
it's worth it, but not everybody can afford this. I also live in the real world, so I have
Mm.
customers who already stagger for the cost of an app service for $60. So if I tell them, yeah, you need this app service of $60 and also a firewall for $700 per month, they're like, yeah, the cloud is so expensive and we can't afford
Yes,
this.
yes.
So that doesn't make sense. But if you have well, a serious player, a big player, you probably need this because you're handling, well, probably a lot of personal identifiable information, and that
Mm.
stuff should be stored securely. This also goes for the smaller players, but then it might make more sense to have stuff like data masking in a SQL or other security measures in place, like the use of managed identities. So that's
Mm.
rather cheap. It only
Yeah.
costs some development effort, uh, but it's rather cheap to implement. So those Azure services, I totally want to use this, and most of my customers can afford this, and it makes sense.
Mm.
Uh, but if you're working with smaller players who can't or don't want to invest
Mm.
in this, doesn't matter which domain. Uh, Use the VNet integration and start with the managed identity security, like the authentication and authorization, so you can make sure all incoming requests
Mm.
are being authorized to
Okay.
and you know for a fact only certain services or maybe even certain users can access this.
Yeah.
You can have app roles. Also, you can also apply app roles to specific users. So me, Jan, can have reader permissions to service A,
Mm.
and you can have a writer permission to service A. So I can only read stuff, and when I'm invoking a post endpoint, I'll just get an unauthorized response, and you will get a 200 OK or or an accepted. So and that's rather useful because you can see if you're doing some SQL injection, you can see, hey, Amrita is doing some SQL injection. Let's
Mm.
call her, and if it was on purpose or maybe she has some virus on her system.
Yeah.
So that's the cheapest solution to start with, no matter which domain you are. It does take
Mm.
some investigation and some implementation effort. I have some blog posts on the matter, so that might help out.
Yeah, sure, sure. So, yeah, yes, Jan. So far, you've been giving us beautiful insights about what multi-layer security is and why should we go for that. And it's very informative the way you deliver your thoughts on it. Yeah. So, yes, having this in hand, what would be your tip to the Azure community? It can be any sort of tip regarding this particular topic that we have spoke, or if you have any resources that people can come in and learn about. I definitely, you are a YouTuber, and I went through your channel as well. So yeah, what would be your quick tip to the community, and you can also highlight about your YouTube channel as well.
Yeah. Obviously my YouTube channel is awesome. There's not a lot
Yes,
of there's not a lot of recent content on it. I'm planning to do this in 2022 again.
we're waiting
Uh,
for it.
yeah, thanks. What you definitely should, or your watchers and the listeners should check out is, if they haven't already,
Mm,
the Azure architecture documentation. So there's a whole site on the Azure documentation,
mm,
which is focused on the Azure architecture, different kind of Azure architectures. So also mentions the hub and spoke and how to secure your environment, but also how to design your cloud solutions from startup or maybe even when expanding it. So a lot of stuff uh, I've learned in the past couple of years is documented over there with, well, a lot of smart people writing it. So definitely worth checking out.
yeah, sure. So, one quick recommendation or tip to the Azure beginners. So, when a particular organization or a specific individual is trying to migrate to Azure, or is trying to learn Azure, or is trying to implement their business in Azure, so what would be your quick recommendation or tip to them? Yeah.
Um, it might sound cheesy, but I definitely check out the MS Learn portal and go for the, if you're totally new to Azure and haven't heard about it yet, go
Mm,
for the Azure 900 exams and make sure you pass it. And if you have an interest in development, go with the Azure 200 series and 400 series exams. So the MS Learn and passing the exams
yeah.
is a great way to start. I know in the past when I did the .NET exams like 10, 15 years ago,
All right.
and you had the MCPD and MCTS exams.
Mm-mm.
They weren't very useful, or at least I didn't think they were very useful. But these
Mm.
Azure exams are quite useful, and I've still learned a ton of it by going through the MS Learn portal. You even get points on the MS Learn, so that's good.
Good thing.
Points and badges. So that's for beginners. That's a great tip from my side.
Yeah. So yes, thank you so much, Jan. It was a great session with you, and also very very thoughtful ideas and thoughtful processing from your end. Very happy to share this particular time space with you, and I hope the viewers would also have got an insight about this particular multi-layer security. And definitely, we can see many people been implementing it after this. And yeah, good luck for all your work that you have been doing, and all your YouTube channels, or be it your professional work. Very good luck from our end, and we also expect more content from your end to educate us on this. So we're waiting for more content from your end and more podcast and webinars and blog session from your end. So we'd be very happy to host you in all of our resources so that we can educate the community together. Yeah, thank you so much, Jan, for your time in this session.
Thanks for having me, and have a great day.
Cove.co